Howdy. I'm here in Texas. It's February the 3rd. I think winter this year lasted about 3 weeks. Today it's supposed to be 80 degrees. Well, thank goodness that's over and we can get back to some normal weather around here. Anyways, a few weeks ago I posted a video about Seminole Canyon and about the cave paintings there, and I showed some pictures I took of those paintings. And while I was on that tour, the person giving the tour said they weren't real sure what the paintings represented or who put them there. All they knew was it was about 4,000 years ago from the dates that they had gotten from the oldest part of the paintings. So I started doing some research and digging around, and I ordered a couple of books that I'll get into later on in the video, and I burned through those pretty quick. Some websites that I found, and there's several things that tie in here. First off, I believe I've got a pretty good idea of who those people were and where they came from. So we'll go into that first. These people that visited this area of Texas did so with a very specific reason in mind. They were there to collect something they couldn't get where they lived, which was about 300 or 400 miles to the south. So they traveled on foot, no roads, no maps, from their homeland up there, got what they wanted, stayed for a while, and then they traveled back. To make this journey, it required some specific people that would be important to the group making the journey. The group was probably a small group of people, probably about 10 people, something like that, and there was 3 that were specifically tasked with getting you down there and getting you home. And the first would be some kind of a navigator, someone who could tell by the stars where you were at and then point in a direction in the morning and say, we need to head towards that landmark, towards that mountain, towards that valley. We need to follow this stream or this river, and get you from 300 or 400 miles away to the other side of the Rio Grande, which is where they would camp out for a while before heading home. The other person you would need is a hunter, somebody who's really good with what they call an atlatl. An atlatl is a spear thrower. It throws darts to spears. It's a long wooden thing, and they would hold it, and it would stick it back here, and they could sort of hold something on it, and then they would fling it like that, and it put some extra zip on it. So they would also have to know how to make arrowheads, spearheads, knives, so they'd have to be pretty good with stone tools, know what rocks to use, know what they're looking for there. So you've got a navigator, you've got a hunter that's going to help keep food on the table, and you've got some people that will gather edible plants and stuff as you go as well. And then you've got the shaman, and he's sort of the manager of the whole deal. The shaman is your spiritual connection to the world. Now, everything is spiritual to these people. Every living thing on earth has some side of spirit in it. They think that when someone gets sick, that's a spiritual deficiency, not a physical one. Something is wrong with you you're spiritually. So what they're heading there to collect is peyote, and they come every year. And they collect as much peyote as they can, and then they take it home. They get to that last mountain range before they go down into the desert, and they have to cross a pretty big swath of desert, and then to get to the Rio Grande and to the canyons on the other side of that. And in that last mountain range, that's where their creation story begins. So they have a ceremony there before they head down into the desert where they're going to collect the peyote from. And they have this ceremony And part of it is they have to cleanse themselves. So they have to do a sort of a confessional to this shaman, and they have a piece of twine or rope or a leather strip that they've brought with them, and for every thing they've done that wouldn't be acceptable or that they feel guilt towards, they tie a knot in this piece of twine or whatever they're using. And after they've completed their confessions, everybody in the group, they burn the things in a fire, and that supposedly cleanses them of guilt, and then they can proceed on their journey. They come out of the mountains, and then they look for deer tracks. Deer tracks are very important. The shaman a lot of times will have a headdress with deer antlers on it. And when you look at these paintings and you see one of these figures and it has antlers, that's probably the shaman. They look for deer tracks. They follow the deer tracks. And then when the shaman spots the cactus, the hunter slings a dart at it, and that's how everybody knows we're in the zone now. This stuff's around, so they start looking for the peyote and harvesting it. They cut the little tops off the cactus, and then they make their way across the Rio Grande to these shelters on the other side. By the way, the canyons, when it rains, gravel and rocks wash out of the canyon into the Rio Grande, so it makes a sort of a natural, easy place to cross the river. And then inside the canyons, there's rock shelters cut into the limestone. So those make a good place to shelter, to live while you're there. When they get there, they dry the peyote, and they eat a lot of the peyote and have religious ceremonies. And one thing about Seminole Canyon that I believe is that there were quite a few burials that took place there. In the main shelter, they found 6 graves there. But there's another place, and this is where it gets interesting. There's a big sinkhole there. And this sinkhole, evidently, I haven't seen pictures of it, but there's an opening from the top that goes into this sinkhole, and they call it Seminole Sink. And then there's a cave entrance from the side that gets in there. In that sinkhole, they found 21 graves. 21 people had been buried in there. 10 adults and 11 children. They'd been cremated, and then their remains, what were left over, carefully wrapped and placed. They weren't just like thrown in here, bones all jumbled up. They were carefully placed in there. So that painting, and I'll explain why when I show the painting, we start talking about it, I'll show the pictures again. I believe that painting is a remembrance of a funeral taking place there in Seminole Canyon 4,000 years ago. So let's take a look at it, and maybe you agree and maybe you don't. I'm no expert, but I'll make my case and you can tell me what you think. Let's go. Howdy, before we get going, just a little update on the sink, where the graves were. There were 21 graves that were originally placed in the sink. Those are believed to be 4,000 years old plus. They said 4,000 years would be a starting point, and they need more information, but they think it'll go backwards from there. These graves were not cremated. They were put in from the top of the sink, from the ground opening, and they were covered by what they call a talus cone, which is a mound of debris, rocks and such, dirt that had washed in the sink or been placed in the sink. Not sure over that. And there was one body who had been cremated, but they think that grave was probably in the hundreds of years old. And so I just wanted to make a correction on that. I came across some new information. I found that out. So, all right, here we go. Okay, here's kind of an overview of the section we're going to be dealing with first. You can see in the middle part of there, that's sort of the reality, the world we're living in. Underneath there represents the underworld, and above there, there's some stuff on the top of the cave as well that would represent like a spirit realm, where people go after they leave this earth. And so let's break it down. This is to the far right side of the shelter. And you can see this entity there. This entity is, it could be representing a shaman, or it could be representing a spirit that's there to help guide the deceased onto the next world. The item that looks kind of like a cross to the left of him, I believe that's actually a sort of a compass. I see that over and over again. Here you have a fire. Fire is meant to cleanse, I believe, the soul of the deceased. And then above that, there's a sort of a gate or a portal. This is the barrier between this world and the next. Now, I know there's some of you that look at this and say, oh, look, a deer feeder. No, it's not. There's a serpent above this object, and I believe this is the sink. This is the place where the bodies were placed, the grave. This is the hole in the ground. It's a hole that widens as it goes down, and I believe this represents the sink, and the serpent above the sink again represents the barrier between this world and the next. And here you've got the other side of the sink with the other gate there, the serpent connecting the two gates and creating a barrier between this world and the next. On the left side of the shelter, we have three figures, and we'll go into these in a little more detail. These are on the south end of the shelter here at the Fate Bell Shelter in Seminole Canyon. So we'll break these down, and I'll try to separate them and talk about them one at a time. This, on the far right of the three figures, would be the hunter.
You can clearly see the atlatl in his hand to the right of the screen, what would be his left hand. And also above his head, you can see some dots. I believe those dots represent peyote. And you can see how the dots sort of start just above him and then go past this border, which would be the other side of the spiritual world. So it's definitely showing some vision of this plant taking you to the other side of the spiritual world. This figure, the far left of the three figures, is who I believe would be the navigator. He's holding his staff that's got a decorative top on it. That would mean that as the group is traversing, he's easy to spot, and he's the one who shows them the way. He gets them there, he gets them home. I believe at that time, this is 4,000 years ago, I believe these people had deep knowledge of the stars and where they were in the sky at a certain time of year. So this person would have the capability to study the night sky as it opened up and the sun fell, and then use this staff and lay it on the ground and say, this is the direction we have to go tomorrow, and then be able to pick out a point in the distance that would be their goal to head to that day. This figure in the middle, this is the shaman. He's got the deer antlers on his head, him or her, and if you look closely, if you can zoom in, the tips of those antlers have black dots on them. Again, this represents peyote. He's the one in charge of the group. He's the spiritual leader. He's the one people turn to when they need guidance or to perform ceremonies that are very important to them, such as what I believe is going on here, which is a funeral ceremony. So he's in charge of it. He's directing it, and he's the spiritual guide for the group. So here you have the three. You have the hunter on the right, the navigator on the left, the shaman in the middle. The feet of the navigator and the hunter are both turned towards the shaman. That's giving him the authority, I believe. And now, when you look at this whole thing here, behind them is a barrier. This black with red and white. It's black through the middle, red on the bottom, white on the top. To me, I believe this is a barrier between this world and the next. The red represents the underworld, the top white represents the light, and the black represents the barrier between the two. And off to the left, you see a figure raised above the other figures, arms outstretched. And this figure is the deceased person, and they are helping to guide him into the next life. And his feet are pointing not towards the navigator, although it might look like that at first, but his feet, if you know the orientation of this canyon, they're pointing south to the mountains where his creation story begins and where he's headed to now to complete the circle of life.
Well, that's it for this one. Hey, until next time, take it easy.